to your afternoon sessions at Learning Technologies. I'm Dr. Hannah Gore, and I have the immense pleasure of working with Peter and Tim today. So we're in here to talk about data. If that's not the room for you, well, you're in for a treat. That's all I'm going to say. And so we're going to hear some great stuff from two of the greatest minds in data and L&D. There will be questions at the end. So if you want to tweet using the session hashtag that's in your profiles in your program, please do. And then, so just sit tight, tune in, tweet out, and enjoy the session, everyone.
Thank you, Hannah. I feel very, very fortunate to be here with Hannah and Peter, so thank you all for coming. I would like to start off with actually a bit of a strange question. Do we have any music fans in the audience, just by a show of hands? Music fans? Anyone with your hand up, could you answer the question of what you think is the similar overlap between artists like Prince and Tame Impala? I told you it was a weird question. I'll help you out. They are both amazing multi-instrumentalists who do everything themselves. The reality is that's not what I'm going to share with you today. I have a collection of short stories or vignettes around different people at Novartis and how do we use data to improve our decision-making in learning. And that's one thing I really want to focus on is the people behind that, because I will raise my hand and admit fault that my first reaction to talking about learning analytics is generally to jump to the tech and the pretty dashboard. And I've actually set a goal for myself to not use any data visualizations in my session today. I failed miserably, but I tried. But I really want to try to stick to those stories in particular. Now, some of you might be familiar with our strategy at Novartis of building a company that is inspired, curious, and unbossed. And within that curiosity, there's really a huge cultural focus on how do we create an environment of curiosity at the organization, and that feeds into learning and development opportunities, psychological safety, etc. I'm actually not going to talk too much about that because I am not the expert, but I will plug my boss's session tomorrow afternoon for anyone interested in hearing from our CLO, Simon Brown. They have a great deep dive into curiosity. But over the last couple of years, with that success and investment in building that culture of curiosity at Novartis, we've really had a lot of exciting progress in terms of investing in our associates, providing them a great amount of resources, and creating that type of environment for change. With that success, with that investment of time, of people, of resources, naturally creates opportunities for improvement and optimization. So what I want to start with is actually some data that isn't about learning per se, or doesn't come from learning systems, but to highlight where different data sources can provide us with insight in terms of building business cases for what we're trying to accomplish at an organization. So I've got a few data points up on screen that are a collection of data summarized from employee experience surveys and exit surveys for people leaving the organization, highlighting some of their challenges. And we can see that for as much as we have invested through our culture of curiosity and building an inspired workforce, people still struggle to find opportunities in learning that are relevant to them, whether that is a learning experience, a learning opportunity, or a career opportunity, or a new project to stretch themselves out. Also, they're unaware of the skills that they need to develop. Skills are naturally a very, very hot topic this week here at this event. We have a dedicated skills strategy at Novartis, and half of our organization doesn't know what skills they need. And so that's a clear opportunity for us to understand how can we improve upon that, and what might we do differently because of that. In addition to the environment that our associates are facing, we can see that we have invested a lot in building a comprehensive portfolio of options and opportunities for our associates. There's a lot to that. There's a lot of vendor partnerships. There's a lot of internal teams that have built a lot of great content. It's a very comprehensive portfolio. And speaking of the theme of I am not a multi-instrumentalist doing everything, I want to give specific credit here to our head of portfolio strategy, Orshi Hein. She's pulled a lot of this data from what is relatively simple consumption data from the LMS. This is not super deep, intensive machine learning or multiple system data aggregation type of data-driven decision making, but it's assessing our current state of why might we see some of the problems that were highlighted on the previous slide. When we see things like over half of our courses don't actually have a description, it's not hard to realize why people struggle to find personalized learning, whether it's in an LMS or in an LXP or any other system. Similarly, on top of that problem, we've got hundreds of thousands of learning objects, and that is growing at a very rapid rate. So it makes that metadata even more critical to ensure that people can find what they're looking for. And in particular, naturally, the investment comes at a genuine financial cost. So if we're spending that much money, we really need to ensure that we're optimizing that cost and getting as much value out of it as we can. So this is a bit of our current situation. We have some great opportunities to improve what we've invested in from a skills strategy standpoint, as well as from a content and a portfolio optimization standpoint. So what I want to transition to is a few examples of just what are we doing about it. So I want to start once again with what is a relatively simple data set. We're all familiar, I imagine, with the quarterly business review process, whether it's a systems vendor or a content vendor. We all have QBRs where generally we receive the metrics that paint the vendor in the best light. It's just the reality of it. I'll be a little harsh on vendors in this story, but I'll make it up to them a little bit later, I promise. So for this particular content provider, working with Andre, our senior operational excellence partner, who's done a great job here, we've been having regular QBRs with them. We have a large investment with this particular partner, and a simple high-level metric that they use to demonstrate and communicate their value to us is 35,000 unique active users in the last year. What does that actually mean? And how much do we even care about that? So on one hand, we know that that's painting them in the best light. If we think about everything I've just been talking about with our current situation, we have a lot of investments across multiple vendors. So we need to look at how can we either optimize that investment and make sure people are using it, they're building skills from it, they're able to find it, or if they're not, candidly, how do we renegotiate that contract in more favorable terms for us as an organization? So just by simply taking, once again, simple completion data, but asking some interrogative questions into what actually sits within that data, and challenging, candidly, our partner, and having kind of a collaborative working session around what does an active user actually mean and represent. If we can cross-reference that with our HR information system data, we can now eliminate that, as a matter of fact, over the last 12 months, a good chunk of these 35,000 people are no longer at Novartis. On top of that, how many of them are internal full-time employees versus external contractors? And how are they defining active? Is it multiple logins over the course of a year? Because that's a pretty low bar, in our opinion. And so how can we as an organization redefine active in terms of this conversation? And whether that is a tighter time frame, which we applied, is it more robust engagement metrics, is it more robust completion metrics and higher benchmarks? So we did all of that, and we came up with what we thought was a more fair representative definition of active. The reality of what was left at the end of this was this number was about, in our opinion, a quarter of what the vendor had reported to us. And so that puts us in a much stronger position going forward in our future QBRs with them to not accept what they're sharing with us at face value and push them to get more out of that relationship. And if over the course of our agreement with the vendor, they cannot deliver on that push to get more out of the relationship, then it becomes a contractual renegotiation point that we can really benefit from and use as leverage going forward. And I think this is a great example of when we think about the impact of learning data and what can we do in terms of making decisions from it. I'm intentionally sharing this story, which is simple data, but it's about the process that comes from interpreting that data. So I use the music analogy of a multi-instrumentalist, and here I'm going to talk about processes as well to double down on the tried and true methodology, whether it's for operational excellence or implementation of a new practice, but people, process, technology. That's why I've intentionally stepped back from all of the pretty dashboards that I get excited about and love sharing, because I think it's just as much about what you can do with the people and the processes before you even get to the technology. So another example of that, and this is where I'm going to be a little bit more friendly to vendors in this particular short story. So we actually were, as part of our portfolio analysis, decided to look at our entire end-to-end catalog. Here we're looking at 3 different major content providers that we partner with, as well as all of our own internally created content, to understand if one of our objectives is to help our associates find personalized learning experiences that are helping them build future skills. Can we tag every piece of content in our portfolio with the skills that's related to using machine learning algorithms? So we did this as an experiment and partnered with a vendor called Filtered that some of you may be familiar with. And the broad takeaway was the better the metadata, the more accurate the content can be tagged, without a doubt. So if you look at the 3 vendors, they range from about 85 to 95% level of confidence with what we have tagged the skills of their content. Whereas our internally created content is barely 60% confident, which is to say, essentially, those skill tags are unusable. We cannot tag our own internally created content with skills because the metadata is not good enough. If we think back to some of the data Orsi uncovered, it's not a surprise because over half of our courses don't have a description. So once again, when we're thinking about how do we provide targeted skilling or precision learning or whatever name we apply to it, how are we going to do that if simple things aren't in place like course metadata? And it's not the most exciting thing to talk about, course metadata, but if it's not set up and not in place, all of the recommendation algorithms aren't going to be very effective. All of the search algorithms aren't going to be very effective. It is truly critical to actually providing a personalized, targeted, skills-based experience. So what are we actually doing about this? I mentioned the people, process, technology. I'm not actually going to get into this very complex process, but this is what we are implementing to solve some of those challenges with our internal portfolio. We have both an intake process and a content management process that is really focused on every new learning need that is identified that will come into our portfolio. How does that go through an entire management lifecycle? How do we determine whether or not to build, buy, or reuse? How do we determine how much or what to invest in that? And you are darn certain that good metadata is a part of that process. We need to create a barrier so that anything new coming into our environment comes in with the good metadata that is going to drive great user and learner experiences long term, and also provide us the data and insights that we need on the back end to be able to make better, more educated decisions about our learning programs. I'm going to jump into a slightly different short story here, and this comes from our Global Head of Learning Insights and Analytics, Dushyant Pandey. So Dushyant has put together this excellent framework that we are implementing at Novartis across these different pillars of learning analytics. I've already touched on a couple of these here with looking at consumption and portfolio analytics. How do we evaluate that? And how do we make decisions from what is relatively straightforward or simple data at times? What I want to touch on now is how we look at knowledge sharing and skills. So that comes back into our broader strategic ambition very, very, very clearly. So from a knowledge sharing perspective, that really comes out as part of our culture of curiosity. If we want to be able to share lessons learned, if we want to be able to empower subject matter experts, especially in an organization where research and innovation is supposed to be our competitive advantage, how do we as a learning organization accelerate and support knowledge sharing? Similarly, from a skills perspective, based on some of the early data that we were collecting from employee experience surveys, we took 2 approaches to providing opportunities to improve how people find personalized learning opportunities. We're implementing new processes to control how we manage content, improve the data, improve the experience. We're also deploying a learning experience platform that is driving a skill-centric experience for our associates. On top of that, there's a collaboration between the learning team and the talent team to deploy a talent marketplace alongside that learning experience platform. I'm not going to get into the details of the integration between the talent marketplace and LXP, If you're curious, I'm happy to answer questions. What I will say is, similar to our vendor management story around our content provider, don't be afraid to push them to do more. Amanda mentioned earlier this morning, beware of open API promises from vendors. And we're working with vendors who gave us open API promises. And we called them on those promises before we went live globally, so that we do have exchanges of data and information between our talent marketplace and our learning experience platform that really make a big difference to us. It's not perfect, and it was not easy, and it's a journey that we're still very early on, but that's definitely one lesson learned from us is how can we ask more of vendors, especially at points where you have leverage, whether that's pre-contract, pre-global rollout, how can you really take advantage of those to get the most out of those relationships and really drive that integrated data that is going to be critical to getting real insights out of it at the end of the day. We're seeing a lot of kind of supply and demand analogies this week at this event, and when we think about skills coming from either a strategic workforce planning team or another talent team, us being able to receive that skills-based data from them in the learning organization is critical to then us being able to determine, do we need to buy a learning program to support this? Do we need to build it ourselves? Can we curate it from existing assets? And that's where I think there's even a great relationship between our knowledge sharing and skills strategy. Once again, these are some simple representations of data from these two strategies, but I just want to use it to highlight a couple of different things that we're looking at. We're trying to think about how do you actually measure knowledge creation and knowledge sharing. If anyone has great ideas, I'm very much open to suggestions. It's something that we're relatively new into, but we're trying to look at some of the social elements within our learning experience platform. And in particular, how many of our subject matter experts are creating user-generated content. Generally, our learning culture at Novartis has been one of administration first, access last. We've intentionally taken a different approach with our learning experience platform. We can't change the way we operate our learning management system. As a life science organization, the compliance regulations and regulatory regulations that mandate how we operate that are not going to change, and we can't loosen them. But we do have some more flexibility in our learning experience platform, and that's where we can create opportunities for associates across the entire organization to create their own content. And from that user-generated content, this is just in the last 6 weeks, because that's as recently as we launched our learning experience platform globally. We're really excited about the thousands of assets that we're seeing created and shared across the organization to where it makes up 13% of the portfolio right now within the LXP. On the other side, we're looking at a really relatively simple bar graph that is our top skill goals. What I like about this is it's still simple, but it's the integrated data behind it. So these are skill goals regardless of if they've been identified as a development goal in the talent marketplace, a skills gap in the talent marketplace, or a learning goal in the learning experience platform. It's part of tying that user journey together so that if someone is looking for a stretch assignment in the talent marketplace or is trying to figure out their next role in their career path, and perhaps the hiring manager decides that I've identified this skill gap, if you build this skill further, you'll be reconsidered at the next round. How do we loop that user experience and user journey directly into a new skill building opportunity within the learning experience platform? Another thing, I'm going to piggyback on a lot of what Amanda said in her session this morning. So if you weren't there, I apologize, but I'll do my best to provide additional context. There was a lot of talk also about how do we actually develop skills. I'm reticent to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's a tried and true thing that we all understand. There's the old 70-20-10 model. We don't just develop new skills in isolation, completing digital learning experiences provided from a learning experience platform. It requires practice, it requires application. So how do we blend that user experience as well between how people find stretch assignments, how they find projects in the talent marketplace, and how they find learning opportunities? So right now, people can find learning opportunities from our learning experience platform directly within the talent marketplace. And we're working to make that work the other way around as well, so that frankly, we are intentionally trying to blur the lines a little bit so that you can build knowledge and you can practice a skill as part of an end-to-end program or playlist or however you want to phrase it, but it's an end-to-end experience across these different systems and opportunities, which then provides us better end-to-end data. So that's where I'm interested in these skill goals here also, because it provides us an opportunity in the same way that talent teams make build versus buy decisions, and when it's a build decision, they look to learning. We in learning can make similar build versus buy decisions when we're looking at how we build skills across the organization. In my opinion, I'm open to argument, but a PMP certification is a PMP certification. Agile is agile. Do we need to build project management skills within Novartis that are unique to Novartis? I would argue no. However, the third most popular skill goal is clinical research. And we also have 13% of a portfolio in the learning experience platform that is content created by subject matter experts within a life science organization. So now how do we as a learning organization close this loop and look at if we need to build clinical research experiences to build that skill within our organization? We have a pool of things to curate from expert-created content already. Now, some of this user-generated content might not have the best user experience. It might be something created by a research scientist or a lab technician, but that's also part of what curation is, in my mind. It's not just reposting something into a playlist. It's also about how do I extract the knowledge from it and put it in a more interpretable and digestible format for associates to actually learn and build on that knowledge. There's also an element here of data aggregation, not just between the talent marketplace and the learning experience platform, but also as we start to look at our portfolio and interactions with different assets, the integration between our learning management system and our learning experience platform. So we've also been doing some experimentation on this side as well. So in the same way we worked with Filtered to help experiment around content intelligence, we've worked with the fine folks at Watershed to understand what is the best way for us to understand all of the data coming from our different learning systems. And in particular, why we think it's so critical, not just for us as a global organization, to make decisions around, at a global level, around all of the data from those different learning systems, but if we want to actually free ourselves up to potentially measure the impact of learning in certain unique ways or dedicate our time elsewhere, we can't be constantly creating new dashboards for new programs. We need to be able to democratize the access to the learning measurement and analytics in the same way we want to democratize access to learning with the LXP. And so in that sense, that's why we think the data aggregation piece is so critical. And to move on to one last short story here, another part of Dishant's strategy as our global head of learning insights and analytics is that democratization of learning analytics across the organization. So how can he provide the processes and the technology that empower our people across our learning org at Novartis to measure the impact of their learning better themselves? And so if he does that, he's now able to use this framework for the large global programs to understand how do we actually prioritize what we measure for impact. The reality is not everything can be measured for impact and not everything should be measured for impact. So in this sense, these are the 4 sets of criteria that Dishant and team use to determine, are we even going to bother trying to measure the impact of this learning intervention or this learning program? Does it have leadership sponsorship? Or is it tied directly to a business transformation or a business objective that is clearly defined? With those business objectives, are they aligned to the learning objectives and the learning needs? Do we understand a clear relationship between our desired outcome or behavioral change of a learning program or a learning intervention, and is that agreed upon not just within the learning function, but with the business partners as well? And for that agreement, do we agree on those performance metrics? Do we agree on what the actual business is expecting to change as a result of an intervention or a learning program? And then how do we understand the cost? The reality is all of this is going to come down to a cost-benefit analysis. If we can demonstrate the impact of learning, and the impact is we generated $14 million in savings, but the program cost $15 million to deploy, it's still not an impactful program. In addition to understanding the cost, we are now able to set our own internal benchmarks. So if we can understand the cost per performance on a program by program level, we at a global level can start to benchmark ourselves against our other programs. So if we understand from a performance perspective, what is the cost to build skill XYZ? If we understand the cost per hour, the cost per learner, we can start to build out benchmarking to understand at a very detailed level that build versus buy calculation and start to build out those analyses much more robustly across some of those different learning impact measurements. All right, I just want to wrap up real quick before I hand it over to Peter, because you may have noticed with that democratization of analytics, I actually didn't go into kind of an end-to-end impact measurement of a learning intervention or a learning program case study. That was intentional because I think Peter's got some great examples, but I also really wanted to focus on some fundamentals around data and analytics that are less about pretty dashboards. The people, process, technology component I don't think can be overstated, especially when it comes to metadata and integration, because that is all process driven. I don't think I can overstate the importance of metadata in terms of driving the associate experience, providing actual personalized learning opportunities, and being able to understand just what the heck is going on across your organization and across your learning function without the appropriate level of metadata. Similarly, from a data integration piece, both from a learning system to learning system perspective and from a learning and talent perspective. If we're focusing on a skills strategy, we need to have that understanding of the skills pipeline from both talent and learning, and also across all of our learning systems so that we're able to make decisions holistically. I've also highlighted that we have a great team of people at Novartis, and even still, with abundant people resources in our global learning team, we're still strained for time. There is never enough time, no matter how many people, great people you have on the team. So from Dishant's perspective, as our global head of learning and insights, his focus is on democratizing measurement and analytics across the organization so that when it comes time to really truly measuring the impact of our largest, most impactful investments, he actually has the time to do it and can do it properly. And then one final takeaway that I have before I hand it over to Peter is to remember that not all data about learning is learning data. So in that sense, I started this session with employee experience surveys, with exit surveys from our P&O colleagues. None of that is about learning per se, but it's helped us build the business cases for projects related to learning. Similarly, when we think about the impact of learning, we're talking about build versus buy decisions. And normally, learning comes in at the build decision. We're not always part of the buy decision. But the reality is new hire surveys at Novartis show that the most important part of any buy decision for associates joining the company is the opportunity for learning at Novartis. So even still, that's a metric that we are extremely proud of, that's the number one reason for talent attraction for new hires to the company, is the learning opportunities we provide them when they join. With that, I'm actually not going to take questions. As Hannah mentioned, we're going to do a Q&A roundup at the end, and I'm going to pass it over to Peter, and he can share what's going on at Novo Nordisk.
Systems, and now Peter is going to give us a deep dive into data lakes. There will be a Q&A session at the end. If you are on Twitter, do use the session hashtag, because I will be picking up the questions from there as well as in the room. Thank you.
How ironic is that? Tech stuff, thanks. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. It's a hot room. I can see faces slowly, and phones coming out, keeping you guys alive. All right, so I am a middle-aged, nearly 40-year-old guy. I am not a doctor. I don't even have a master's degree. I am just a white dude who is super passionate about proving that learning interventions makes a difference for the business. Okay? This means that anyone can do it, basically. That's reassuring, right? Came in here, learning analytics sounds powerful. Well, if I can do it, then anyone can do it. I'm just gonna take off my shoes, they're super uncomfortable. Just one sec. Yeah. I'm also pretty crazy, and I'm probably gonna say something super controversial as well during the session. I'm sorry in advance, I do not mean any offense to anyone. I'm just passionate, okay? I'll take you through something from the battlefield. Because I think, and I've had opinions for a while. I've been working in L&D for quite a while as well, and I've had opinions, but I've never really done it. So 3 years ago, I set out to do it, and we haven't done it yet. but I'm going to report from the battlefield, okay? From someone actually trying to do it, which I think is pretty cool. So let's do that. Are you with me? Yes. Oh yeah. All right, so let's start out with a math test. I still suck at math. So, anyone who can read it. You've got 1,000 managers that needs to go through something twice a year. It's a 3-hour session each time. And they've also got some prep work and some self-directed, very posh and fashionable learning stuff, and some community, yeah. So these are the measurements. Get your calculators out. What's the cost? If anyone takes a screenshot or a photo of the screen, I will photobomb every time with the swan, so that you'll get that with you. So what's the price? I hear 400,000. Did you do that with your mind, or does anyone have a calculator? A phone? I'm fishing. I know so many smart people in this room. I can't believe this. This is, yeah. Did anyone major in math? 400? 500. All right. And now I'll show you that, and you're right, it is 400, that I sucked at math, but that doesn't matter. It kind of proves the point. I suck at math. But it doesn't matter, and this is probably memorable as well. Who's doing leadership courses in here? Who's deploying leadership programs? Anyone raise your hand? Project management courses to the organization, who does that? Does anyone know what that costs you guys in salary expenses of the people who has to take those courses? Someone's nodding. All right, you know, yeah. So, is anyone brave enough to say they don't know? Because we sure as hell don't in Novartis on all the stuff that we send out. But there is an expense in every time someone goes on a course or a program, or any intervention that you send out there has a cost in the organization, salary. But there's also the opportunity cost of what they could have done instead of taking your program or your course, right? There's also the cost of delivery, which we often know because we've paid the invoice. How are you supposed to get that back? What's the plan, guys? So if I spend 400,000 euro on this, how do I expect to get that back? Isn't that a reasonable question? Why aren't we asked this question in general in learning and development? That would not happen in any other part of a company, any other part. If you do a marketing campaign, a product enhancement, new packaging for the product, there will be calculations on every little detail. Is the return on investment, is that coming through? Not in learning and development. No, let's just send it out there and pray to God it works. All right? We hope. That is so strange. I wonder why we don't have a seat at the table. It's so strange. So, I'm not going to dwell too long on these questions. But if you were working in any other function in the company, would you send out a new product on the market without calculating any of these things? No, you probably wouldn't. Would you send out a leadership course to the organization without calculating these things? Yes, because you are doing it. Stop doing it now. Go find your salary data, talk to someone who has that kind of data, and go calculate the population that's going on your next leadership course. What's the general salary across currencies? Just calculate it and find out. So if we deploy this to these 1,000 people, what's the plan to get that back at some point? Because we are a company. I beg you, it's not rocket science. Just please do it, okay? So if we drill back a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about learning design. Talk to Solve Together. Talk to Niles Nolan about that. Not going to talk learning strategy, talk to the same kind of people about that. If you do content intelligence like Tim and Novartis does, and we've actually worked with and will work with Filtered as well, please do that as well. I'm not going to talk about all that. I really don't care what happens in the learning experience. What I care about is it impactful? All right? Because I'm not the one to judge whether something works or not. The numbers do, in my opinion at least. So this was our starting point. And it's probably some of you guys' starting points as well, right? You've got a spreadsheet, maybe a data extract, maybe someone has a back-end access to the LMS where you can see some consumption stats on who went through what, or at least, average stuff. But this was our starting point. And now this is the plan. And it looks amazing on paper. The yellow line, the dots, the dates, the fancy words, the buzzwords, it can impress anyone. So, we did an LXP launch. We did that because you can't do anything if you don't know what people are consuming. Whether it's called an LMS or an LXP or whatever you call that kind of HRXP, whatever it will be called in the future, they'll probably come up with a new name today downstairs. But just get a platform where you can track what people do, okay? Because you'll need that. And then we look into data, and we look into democratizing the access to data. It's also around showing people, and dashboards doesn't mean anything. It's like reporting. It looks great, but it's not really user-friendly. It doesn't really do anything. It's not actionable. But it's a step along the way to get people used to looking at data. Then you've got something called experiments. Now, we're a science company. I'm not a scientist. But there's a couple of doctors in here. Hannah, you're a doctor? Amanda, you're a professor. Any other people with a doctor's degree in here today? Or even just a master's? We've got a few of those, luckily. Otherwise, yeah. But when you do your assignments as a researcher or anyone else, you do experiments, right? Okay, so here's a different question. I'm going to go completely crazy now. How many of you guys, when you drum up a new leadership program, a project management course, a video that's supposed to help someone, how many of you guys make 2 or 3 versions of that? Yeah, okay, there's a few, that's great. How many of you test that with different populations? Yeah, there's a few, that's great. So that works, right? So you find out that it's not your world, your leadership course that just goes out there because you think it's an amazing program, it will work. You actually do some pretty solid user testing with different versions to see what tracks best. Now here comes the $1 million question. How many of you hold back for a group of people? How many of you take a group of people and give them nothing? Do you dare? Because training might not be the answer. What if the group that gets nothing actually performs better after 6 months than the groups that had your grade 2 versions of training? What would you do if you found out that the stuff you send out is rubbish? It's terrifying, isn't it? That's what markets us and product people have to live with every day, that feeling. It might not work, guys, because people have to buy the product. We just stuff it down people's throats. I said I would say something controversial, but yeah. At some point, we'll get to a moonshot where we can actually predict performance outcome, which is cool. So if we take this course or this learning intervention, put it into this population at this time with this format, then we predict that the business or sales number or whatever metric we're putting on there will increase by 8%. At some point, when we have enough data in 15 years, yes, it's going to take a long time. It's a tough sell upstairs, but it will. Then we will be able to predict if we do it right. And that's pretty damn cool. Just saying. We'll see if we get there. Yeah, this is the data model. You can take a picture of this. I will still photobomb. All right? this says something about what kind of data are we collecting in the organization. Now I'll show you a few screenshots down. It's just going to browse through screenshots of beautiful dashboards. But this is the core. So I'm interested in a lot of these, but these two are the most interesting for me. It says business performance, it says behavior change. So what learning interventions, what training and learning is actually creating the behavioral change that we want? What business performance is coming out of the process of us deploying training? I know there are a million things that happens apart from training in people's lives that could affect performance, right? Guys, I'm going to say something that I don't know a lot about. We're not talking about causality or causation or whatever that's called in English. There's not a direct line saying, this guy took a training and then performed this much better. We can't do that because there are so many variables in that equation. But if we don't look at correlations, then we're not doing anything. Correlations can be really strong if you have enough data saying, we have an abundance of people who did similar things here, and the output was similar here. And if we can do that enough, that's what machine learning does. This is the stuff we need to be doing, is trying to tell a story around, if we put this training in this context, this will probably happen, most likely. That's a much better bet than just throwing out courses left and right, hoping that they work. Can we just agree on that? And you can nod if you still have the power. You can also disagree, because I am wrong sometimes. But I think it's a no-brainer, in my opinion at least. So this is the vanity metrics, much of it, a lot of it, right? And this is the first kind of thing you can show. So I've got one dude in my team, he's cool, that does data. When I took over my team in Novo Nordisk, I had a small learning team with about 4 or 5 people in it. They were all producing content 3 years ago. And I said, no, we're not producing content anymore. There's enough content. We're not doing that. And everyone was like, but we need e-learning. I said, no, we don't need e-learning. No, we really don't need e-learning. Or let's find out. So what I did instead was hire 3 other people. One that is heading the content stuff, because we need someone as a curation person. Yeah. We need someone who does data. Doesn't have to be a data scientist, but someone who can use the software and knows what numbers is. And then we needed a marketing person. Those are the 3 roles I needed for this strategy to come alive. Someone to make sure the content that we need is there, someone to prove what kind of trainings we should put, the content we should put out there in the right contexts, and then someone to make sure people do it, because engagement is quite a problem, isn't it, in L&D as well. We can't really get people to do what we want them to do. So why don't we look at marketing and see what they're doing to trick you guys into buying stuff? We'll just do it with a good heart and say we trick you into developing yourselves. That's smart. And we use data. We've got all sorts of different things here. Skill growth as well, and popular skills. We've got how many active users do we have on our LXP. This is what senior management asks us to provide metric, right? I don't care. It doesn't mean anything. We've got workplace behaviors, which is pretty cool. We look into the Graph API in Microsoft. You guys have a lot of data on people's behavior, on Teams, on Yammer, in Outlook. You can do so much. What about data privacy or data privacy? Yes, obviously take that seriously and anonymize or pseudo-anonymize your stuff. It's not hard. You can still use the data, all right? Talk to IT, get the data. You've got people data. We even have insights profiles. There's about 8,000 people in Novo Nordisk who's taken an insights profile, their consent that we can use the data, aggregated. So we can actually see here, if you're between 25 and 34, what kind of profile do you have? What kind of format do you prefer? What's your workplace behavior? All sorts of things. So when we design learning, we are informed. When we know the target group, then we also know their behavior. That means that we can design for behavior. Obviously, we need to go through a design process, preferably 5DI. Again, talk to Solve, talk to Nick. Still have to do that, but be informed by the data that you have. Yes, we are tracking skill growth. This is super popular. So people, we've democratized, it's also a buzzword, but we have set that free, we're asking people what skills they have instead of telling them what skills they need to have. People don't like to be told what to do. They like a steer, that's fine, and we are also doing some frameworking around certain roles and all that. It never really lands. How many of you have seen a successful framework, skill framework or competency framework being rolled out in your organizations? How many of you have been part of a successful one that just worked? Are you crazy? How much money are we spending on that? It's insane, and it's outdated the day it comes out there. Let's ask people what skills they have, and then we can accommodate what they need afterwards to that picture. Yeah, it's controversial asking people, I know. It's better if we define, but yeah, that's also no. And we track skill growth, that's fine, all that. I'm also controversial here because I don't care if people have better skills. I don't care if people get better at stuff. I care if they use it for the better in the business, which means that results will be better, or their lives will be better, or they will feel like better people. It can be a million different metrics. But just reporting on that their skill grew, if they're not putting it to use anywhere, what does that matter, guys? Okay. Please give me feedback in the questions or whatnot if you're, have difference of opinion. Yeah. Skills impact, yes, we're also going there. I can see that I need to speed up a little bit. This is important. If you guys are doing happy sheeting, at least do it properly. Ask people, how confident are you to go out and use what you just learned in your job now? That's a better question than were you happy or content with the training, right? So how confident are you now? What's actually stopping you from using what you've learned now? Because there could be things stopping you. And then you can go into this afterwards and say, on program X, module this actually stopped people from this division using what they've learned. Do we have a structural piece of problem that we can go out and take to the business and say, guys in Europe, they can't use what we teach them. We can't go through this stuff with them because you guys are structurally doing something wrong. That's interesting. It's more interesting than, was lunch great? I'm over, simplifying that. So all sorts of things you can do and also if you just describe your experience with one word. I think we have now, it's 413 responses here, but we have around 70,000 responses now. That's enough data to now say something smart about how people feel about their time in the course or whatnot program. So you can do sentiment analysis, text analysis stuff on the words that people use. Do they have a negative sentiment or a positive sentiment? Yes, it's not hard, you can do it. I've almost learned it actually, which that's pretty big. We look at search terms that's being used, also look at Laurie Niles' stuff on data-driven learning design, that book. But we do look into what people search for, not only on our LXP, but also on SharePoint, all sorts of other things. Gives us indications of what people are interested in. Yeah, also an important thing when you design learning. All right, I'm talking. This looks cool. Skills, great. This is the most important thing. I can't show you that because Novartis is here. No, that's not true, Tim, that's not true. But some of these things obviously do have competitive stuff in it, so I can't show you this, but this is actually the most important bit. You can go out and ask your salespeople, what are we selling and who's selling what? They know, because they calculate their incentives and bonuses from that data. So that's not wrong. That is accurate data, and you can get it if you buy someone in the sales department that does data, a cup of coffee, or a beer even, if you go, pop one. Exactly, you're already going. Cool. You can also look into production efficiency. Now we have machines running. There's deviations, there's problems, there's health and safety. Do people get injured? How do they get injured? Before we send out a compliance training to 45,000 people saying road safety is super important, let's try and find out where accidents happen. right? In what frequency? With what people? With who? Where? How? Instead of just mindlessly just throwing it out there once a year, it's stupid. Let's stop doing that. You're probably not going to stop doing it because we all know why, right? But it's stupid. It doesn't make sense. So let's do something different. We've got something around strategy, which I think is super important. Amanda, you talk a lot about strategy. Much better than me at strategy. I'm not good at strategy. I really hate strategies. But senior leaders, they like to spend a lot of time articulating strategies. Isn't that right? And then that trickles down from the top, big words, right? And no one reads it. But it gets digested to some extent because our team, we have to play up against those must-win battles or whatever they're called, so that we kind of ratify that we're actually doing something to support the strategy. But the good thing is, these strategy documents, right? They're really long. You can use text analysis on those strategy documents to find out, one, what skills do they want us to grow in the future realizing this strategy. So you can actually take a text analysis and do some pretty cool stuff on the text and the strategies to see, are we doing the right things in our, in our department? Are we prioritizing the right things? That's pretty cool. Take their documents, dissect them, and then go back to them and say, guys, does that mean that we should focus on XXX? Is that what you mean, or should we do something different? That's cool. That's a seat at the table, by the way. Go do some text analysis. That's the first thing you should Google when you go home. No, do it now. Text analysis, okay? You can extract the text and do analysis. All sorts of different things here. And if you don't have sales numbers, you can always use proxy data like bonus payouts and incentives. Just as good. We have in our company now it's actually proven correlations on people who use our learning in general more than other people. People who use it a lot get much better bonuses. We can prove that now. We can also prove that they're happier in their jobs, they feel more confident, all sorts of things if they use our learning interventions more than others on a general level. People who don't use our learning, we call them low users, get a bonus beneath index 100. People who use our learning interventions quite a lot get an index of 115 in average. That is a great story to go out and tell in the organization and get a seat at the table, which we all want, right? Yeah, so some of this is cool. The last thing I want to say, have I said that before? No, this is the last thing. Network analysis. If you're not doing it, do it. Critical roles, critical communities, that could be HR business partners for just close to you guys, could also be specialists, scientists, whatever, who are important in your company. Who can't we lose? Do some network analysis and find out how they're networked. Do some analysis on what are they interested in, what do they want to learn, what's their look on the future. That is a key to a lot of interesting information on what you can do in L&D to support those people and also to retain them. Because we know that people leave companies right now, and we know that learning is a big factor in keeping people, especially the people we can't afford to lose. So if you go to TA or another place in the company and say, now we know who we can't lose, we also know what skills they'd like to grow, we also know their impact on the business is pretty significant. How do we keep them? How do we keep them hungry? And we could also ask them, what do you think the future looks for our company? Because you're probably driving it. Network analysis. I have overwhelmed you. I have overtalked. Are you half dead by now? Yes. Okay, that's a fair point. Hannah, is that okay? Wonderful. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And we've got time for a couple of questions. The only problem when you get two super passionate data men in the room is that the one bit of data I gave them was the time and they didn't keep to it. So, Can't get the staff. So, any questions from the floor? We're going fast. There's a lady with a lovely microphone. Do not worry.
So this one is for the Mr. Swan photobomb guy. No, I apologize.
That's
The handsome man
piece.
in the bald head. Okay.
I haven't said that. What I wanted to ask is, coming from the life science company, going through this, have you managed to, or have you noticed that you're changing the way you're doing the training, the compliance kind of a training, the training that's, apologies, touching directly the manufacturing and so on? I'm more interested maybe into this aspect, if you can share a few words than, let's say, this upskilling and talent and so on.
The short answer is no, and it's a depressing answer. It takes a long time for learning and development people to ask themselves the question, what's going to change in the business after I've sent this learning intervention out there? People in our company, at least everyone working with learning, has a really difficult time just asking that question, because the practice is, I know there's a problem. Someone, a proxy, a senior leader said there's a problem, so now we need to go and fix it. Already there, the premise is totally wrong. They have to ask, so what baseline are we talking about? What metric? What's the problem that we're trying to solve here? They're not doing that. So I'd say that the easiest way to do that is to bypass them. And then slowly they will disappear. But we are doing that. I'm not kidding, because we've got a lot of content coming from the outside, so we're building less content internally. We don't need to build a lot of content anymore. There's already enough leadership courses out there. We really don't need to build a new one. So what we will do is start using external content, test it in the context, and then prove that it works. Look at business performance on the leadership metrics that we want to change, and then run with that, rather than having gut feelings from senior leaders drive our intake model. And I can't change the minds of people. I can't change how people do things. I can't change L&D professionals' mindset. So the depressing answer is, I can't see a difference at all. People are afraid of using data. And they're not asking the question, what's the business problem I'm trying to solve? And I don't know why. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Do you have a better answer?
Snell's on my team.
All right. Oh, man. Okay. Okay.
Snell knows my answer.
Fair enough.
Do we have any more questions in the room?
Oh,
Morton.
man.
Knew it was coming.
That must be for Tim.
That'll be nice. This one is for Tim.
Thank you.
But I also have a question for you, Peter. So Tim, question for you first, which is, you talked about skills and getting skills from, I assume, the talent systems that you have, using them in learning. So assuming that people learn by some of the interventions that you had, that you prove with the numbers, how do you get your skill scores, talent scores? How do you get them back into your talent systems?
It's an excellent question. We are not there yet, candidly. In terms of what we use is proficiency levels at Novartis. And the intent with the design is the ability to understand the progression of proficiency levels, not just from learning experiences, but also from application in the talent platforms. And in terms of partnering between talent and learning, this is a difficult discussion in terms of what does a skill assessment mean? What is the intention of a skill assessment? For us, our use case behind a skill assessment is really more about part of our personalized learning use case. I want to be able to ensure that I'm providing the right opportunities for you in the right context so that you can progress from this level of skill to that level of skill based on what you need. From the talent side, it's kind of flipped. Theirs is more of an assessment in our relationship to understand more of a hiring decision or a career progression decision. So in some ways, there's a little bit more risk involved in understanding the proficiency of that skill level. So it's a challenge we're working through right now. I don't have a great answer to it in terms of understanding why do different parts of our organization care about how someone is progressing and advancing their skill set. And based on why they care, that affects how they want to measure it and what they want to do with the outcomes of those measurements. It's a great question, and we have some aspirations, but we don't have results right now. Mm-hmm.
can't tell if Morten's got a second question for Peter or not.
Oh no, there's one down
Excellent,
there.
we will save Morten there. Oh, we've got one here as well.
All right, thanks very much. One of the things that the top research universities are really encouraging in their graduates is to think about critical thinking and reflective learning. So first part of it is how are you incorporating those concepts into the stuff that you're doing? And to the last point, are you doing anything 3 to 6 months after the training has been delivered to see if those who went through the training have actually put it into practice?
I can't answer the first thing, so I'll let you
I
do
can
that.
jump in on the first thing, and I'm quite sad that my colleague Miriam Nealon has left the room. She's facilitating a session later this afternoon, so she had to leave, but she actually, as part of our deployment of our learning experience platform, has been using that as a catalyst to implement learning design principles and reinforce within our learning community that a learning path does not have to be a collection of digital assets that you consume. They are prompts for actions as well. And within a structured learning journey in something like a learning experience platform, how can you prompt people for reflection? How can you prompt people for collaboration in different environments and not just have a quote unquote playlist that you watch video 1, watch video 2, watch video 3, now you have a skill. So in that sense for us, it's really about how do we partner with our learning design colleagues and our learning experience design colleagues to reinforce that throughout the organization, that the opportunity's there. There's not actually a technical limitation to doing that now. Just do it.
Yeah, and I don't care what happens in that process at all, so I'm glad that you're here to because it doesn't matter to me. I can see it in the results afterwards, but I accept the premise. The 3 to 6 months after, we have to go longer than that sometimes. And that's the difficult bit here is we human beings, especially in corporate, don't accept that things take time. Mm-hmm. It has to be right now. And we obviously can't see results on everything like safety behavior. It takes time if you do it right. All behavioral things with human beings takes time. So we need to go 1, 2, 3, 4 years into the future before we can really say something smart about whether our training works or not. Experiments you can do in controlled environments in a shorter time span, 1 to 3, 6 months, but you really need time.
I think that's a really critical piece for us to remember as well in terms of stakeholder management.
Yeah.
If we are promising that we will communicate and measure the impact of our learning, we need to also be clear that that won't happen at launch day for a program or a system or an intervention. It's going to take months, it might take years. And while that is something we aspire to and expect of ourselves, it's not going to come on the fancy dashboard that launched week 1. Nope. It takes time.
And I guess it's well known that if you've been trained and your results can look great for a while until you fall back into old habits or whatnot, that would also be something you'd have to counter in for. So there's so many things about looking at data over time that is an advantage, but it's a disadvantage in communication with senior leaders to get budgets to do things. That's a discrepancy. But hey, I mean, it's a matter of going into that boardroom well prepared with your numbers all right, and you say, this is the plan, if we have to do it right, we're a science company or whatever. We can also do it wrong, like we've always done it, but this is the right way, then they usually accept it, is my experience. Yeah, good question. Time.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've slightly run over time. But do track these guys down in the old-fashioned way, in person, if you like, whilst they're walking around during the conference. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I have never seen so many phones get out so quickly to take photos of slides in any other session, not that I'm competitive. So thank you.